monitor the human rights situation in the country was in recognition of Uganda's violent and turbulent history that had been characterized by arbitrary arrests, detention without trial, torture, and brutal repression with impunity on the part of security organs during the pre- and post-independence era. Nicholas Opio is with us tonight to discuss these issues. Nicholas Opio is also a human rights lawyer. Welcome to NTV tonight.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we will start with a point of understanding. The government and security agencies, have they, learned nothing and forgotten nothing as regards the reasons for formulating the Uganda Human Rights Commission?
I mean, I've spent a bit of time reading 15 volumes and over 10,000 pages of the Justice Commission report that chronicles the violations of human rights in Uganda from 1962 to 1986. The events that have characterized the post-independent regimes as compiled in that report bear a striking similarity to what we have seen in Uganda since 1986. I think that the same things are reoccurring, albeit different perpetrators all over the country. So I think that cases of forced disappearances, cases of extrajudicial killings, cases of extreme forms of torture, cases of the denial of a fair right, a right to a fair hearing, is a common practice. The Bill of Rights in our Constitution perhaps is more pronounced by its disregard and disobedience than by its observance.
All right. In your opinion, do we still stand as a country for the values, set therein while setting up the Uganda Human Rights Commission? And of course the Constitution as well. I
think that in many respects there are certain provisions of the Constitution that have been implemented in ways that reflect the letter and spirit of the Constitution. Yeah. If you speak about the rights of women, I mean, in terms of the expression of that right in our Constitution, it's really good provision, and we've seen many women leaders rise to public office. I think that there are now over 100 women in Parliament, both holding the women's seat but also holding directly elected seats. So in some respects, that Constitution has delivered. But I think that at the political side, the civil and political side, what we are seeing is a complete disregard for the consensus that this country, some form of consensus that this country arrived at in 1995 from a very consultative process. What we have done is to amend more than 100 provisions of that Constitution now in about 3 amendments in less than 20 years. So we have seen the denigration of the Constitution. We have seen the manipulation of that Constitution to suit the interest of a few elites, and I think that that Constitution now is a far different document, both in text, spirit, and implementation from what we had envisaged when it was enacted in 1995. All
right, you talk about amendments. There's also been, enactments of new laws. The 2013 Public Order Management Act, which grants police wide discretionary powers over the content and management of public meetings. To what extent has this been a hindrance to, human rights generally?
So we have seen the increased whittling or regression of the Bill of Rights through illegitimate legislation. They may be lawful in the sense that they are passed by Parliament, but in terms of their legitimacy, it is an illegitimate exercise. We've seen several of those laws being passed that have eaten away at the edges of the Bill of Rights. One of such legislation is the Public Order Management Act, which essentially restricts the operation, the exercise of the rights to free assembly and association in the country, and reduces it to a discretionary right, essentially that can be exercised only at the permission, the will and whim of the IGP. You have other laws like the NGO Act, which was just passed a couple of months ago, which severely restricts the space for freedom of association. It in fact creates a negative presumption against free, organized and unregistered associations, so that if you want to organize now as a non-profit, you must register not just with the Uganda Judicial Services Bureau as a company, but also with the NGO Act. But on top of that, you have to get a permit from the NGO Bureau. So we've seen the enactment of legislation that have eaten away at the edges of the Bill of Rights, and has reduced that to rights exercise at the whim of and the will of those in power.
We have arrests, and torture, and all those acts that happen, especially during elections, and campaigns. There's been no accountability for the violent aftermath of the many attacks in which civilians are tortured and some of them killed. How crucial is this accountability to the country? People would be wondering, why would the state be accounting to how many people have died, or why would it be concerned anyway?
I mean, there are too many accounts of innocent and armed civilians whose lives have been tragically ended through extrajudicial killings by the police and the army in this country. What we have seen is a blaming of the victim as opposed to a commitment to a thorough investigation. Not too long ago, 2 years ago in Kasese, the army went and stormed the king's palace and killed, in our count now, about 158 people, 12 of whom were children below the age of 8. And instead of committing to an investigation to what may have gone wrong leading to the killings, the victims are the ones being prosecuted in the courts of law. The perpetrators have been promoted. The police director of operations was commanding that operation. The UPDF Land Forces commander, Mr. Eluelo, who was the commander, he was promoted. So I think that the urge for accountability is more urgent than ever before. We've had victims of walk to work. I can give you an example of a very young girl in Masaka called Sarah Nalwanga, whose life was completely ended through reckless shooting by the police. The former IGP visited the home, sat in that home on a mat and promised investigation. Up until now, nothing has happened. When they have shown some sign of commitment to investigations, they have resorted to administrative processes, such as the police disciplinary court, which is a disciplinary offense, as opposed to prosecuting and holding to account in a criminal justice process perpetrators of violence. So the urge for accountability cannot be made any louder. The second thing is that you have, for example, non-derogable rights, the freedom from torture, the right to a fair hearing. It is being abused every single day. If you go to a police station, any police station in this country, you're going to have people who have been detained there for more than 48 hours, spending countless days in cells before being produced in court. The issue of torture, the Human Rights Commission has chronicled the last 10 years the most pronounced form of torture, of human rights abuse by government officials, the police and the army, has been torture. And yet nothing is done to address those concerns.
A few weeks ago, while in the age limit, hearing in Bale, Justice Kakulu did mention that, these happenings, if they're not tamed, they are going to continue, and we will see probably the Chief Justice being beaten at one point, in time. What do you make of the stance of our courts of law, in these matters, whenever such happenings occur?
I think that there have been some judicial officers that have exercised judicial activism to protect the freedoms provided for in the Constitution. But I think on the overall, that commitment is being undermined by continuously being acquiescence to human rights violations in cases where the police, in investigating cases, have tortured people, have beaten people. This clear sign of heinous violations of rights. Too often the court has been acquiescent to those illegalities by allowing those prosecutions to in fact go on. You have cases that are being brought in court by government prosecutors, and they are bold enough to tell the court that the case is under investigation. Essentially what they have done is charge somebody, denied them their liberty, send them away on remand without any evidence, because they are still investigating a crime. I think the time is now for the courts in Uganda to pick a leaf from retired Justice Ralph Chan, who in the case of Sekabia and others, the Buganda riot case, ruled that the court cannot be an acquiescence to a process of illegality. For as long as it has become clear that heinous human rights violations occurred in the process of arraigning somebody in court, the court must stop henceforth, even if a crime has been committed, because the victim can still seek a civil remedy, but the courts cannot in any circumstances begin to play acquiescence in such heinous cases of violations. Once the courts take that position, prosecutors investigators will be more cautious and perhaps, begin to act in accordance to the law in investigating crime.
What's your reaction to the fact that groups like the Interreligious Council, the Elders Forum, and many others have been trying to lobby for a national dialogue? And of course, this would also entail, reconciliation.
This country needs healing. This country, there are deep-seated historical injustices that we are glossing over. And the simmering ethnic tension, the simmering historical injustices, the questions of lack of accountability on the part of government forces in cases of West Nile, northern Uganda. I mean, people were burnt and killed in a train wagon in Mukura by this government. And we talk about this as if it is a footnote in our history. There are families, there are relatives who are yearning for justice. The president spoke about this for the first time in the last election and apologized, but there's no commitment to investigating and finding closure for those cases. People in Kasese whose children were killed in that palace, who have never seen the dead bodies of their children, want to find closure. The family of people like Mr. Yumbe, who was shot and killed in the Gulu Central Prison by a general in the armed forces. By then he was an intelligence officer. He's been promoted. He's been catapulted. He became chief of logistics. He's now commandant of the reserve force. No accountability. I think this country needs healing in some way or another, and I think the people in power must recognize that stable, peaceful Uganda requires that we find ways of reconciling ourselves as a country. You still have the northern-south divide. If you fly to the north on a plane, once you cross Karuma, you might think in a different country because it is the visible sign of injustice. If you go to West Nile, people in West Nile still rely on a private company to supply them power. If you go to Karamoja, so I think we need to find a space for national dialogue, for national reconciliation, and more importantly, for discussing the possibility of a peaceful political transition. Because elections in and of themselves alone have demonstrated an inability to address that question because they are unfair, they're always inclined to people with resources, people with access to power. So I think that there's need for national reconciliation now more than ever if this country is to be stable.
Right. I want us to conclude on the fact to understand, the relation between human rights and growth for any state, not just Uganda, but any state. And of course, the way forward from your opinion.
Look, I speak to too many lawyers who on their own have gone out to speak to private capital investors, venture capitalists, fund managers across the world to come and invest in this country. Of course, the lawyers want to get some instructions as well, but far too many times these lawyers are faced with questions. Why should we invest in your country when we know your judiciary is not efficient, when we know your courts are corrupt? Why should I invest in your country when we know that there's lack of respect for human rights? Many indices are developed every year. There's the investment risk indices, the rule of law indices that indicate that Uganda is not a free country. Those decisions affect investment decisions by very many people. I know a lawyer who was discussing with a consortium of oil companies coming to Uganda in 2005 when Dr. Kizza Besigye was arrested. He was almost sure the deal was done. They invited him to fly into the country for a signing ceremony, only to be confronted with the headline newspaper articles and the question of why should we invest in your country. That was pulled aside. That's why investors and the development partners invested money in creating a commercial court to try and fasten commercial justice. But even that has now become a white elephant. Cases still take long. In the particular case, for example, what has happened in Arua, the publicity this country is getting dissuades people from, for example, coming for tourism, dissuades people from coming here to visit and spending money. Right now it's winter in Europe, it's very hot, people are coming down to Africa, or to sub-Saharan Africa to come and enjoy the beautiful weather. Then they're not coming here to trek, our parks, to go and, see our parks. So these kind of actions is an economic disincentive for those who want to invest in this country. I can tell you, for example, that just this evening, 5 police officers in Arua are being forced to sign an illegal such certificate allegedly done in Bobi Wine's office. They were not there. They called me and they're complaining. They need protection. You have a such certificate taken back from Gulu to Arua because there's a wrong date, because the gun allegedly found in Bobby Wine's office, hotel room, was in fact never there. It was it was produced for the first time in the office of the RPC. So these kind of things have grave implication on the future of our children, on the future of our country, on the economic growth and development of our country. And the sooner we put our act together, the better perhaps we will be. There are 54 African countries. For somebody to come and invest here, there has to be some sense of comfort. Only rogue investors come here because they make their way to State House and get free tax holidays. We don't have serious long-term investment in this country.
Thank you very much, Nicholas Opio, for joining us tonight on tonight. And of course, Nicholas Opio is a human rights lawyer, and the issues tonight really have been about human rights. That is it for Talk of the Nation tonight. Let's take a short break and we'll return with sport.
It's more than 100 days now. We need you. We need the UN. We need everybody. We need the European Union.